Good afternoon and welcome to our 17th Webinar Wednesday, again featuring two of Israel's and Ben-Gurion University's best and brightest experts in the field of autism research, and two of the leaders of Israel's National Institute of Autism Research at Ben-Gurion University, and also two personal friends of mine with whom I've been working very closely for 3 years, Professor Ilan Dinstein and Dr. Gal Meiri. Shalom, bonjour, and hello to all of you who have registered from around the globe. To be exact, believe it or not, Israel, England, Scotland, France, the United States, and of course, Canada. A special shout out to our national president and my good friend and leader, Mitchell Olbaum, who is celebrating a birthday today. Yom Huledet Sameach, happy birthday. We might also have some of our colleagues from the associates offices in Europe, South America, and Mexico. As most of you know, I am Mark Mendelson, Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Associates of Ben-Gurion University, and it is once again my pleasure and honor to be moderating today's program. I'm thrilled to tell you that we have almost 200 participants registered for today's webinar, and we expect even more to be watching live streaming on Facebook like we had last webinar. My staff, our lay leadership, and I spend many hours discussing which experts and from which field from BGU to bring to our Webinar Wednesday series. And I believe that so far we have chosen very wisely, as each webinar has really resonated with our supporters and friends. And I can tell you that we have attracted almost 3,000 people to our webinars. On behalf of all of us at CABGU, Canadian Associates of Ben-Gurion University, I welcome you and thank you all for participating. I must say that this is just another feather in our cap of successes during these difficult times. Our format today will be similar to our other webinars. I will first introduce Professor Ilan Dinstein, and after he finishes, I will then introduce Dr. Gal Meiri. Each will speak for 15 minutes or so, and I will give them a 2-minute warning before they are to finish their presentation. As usual, my colleague, Galit Solomon, Director of Marketing and Communications, will moderate the question and answer segment, and Zach Ostrov, Executive Director of Winnipeg, our tech expert, will be handling the behind-the-scenes tech issues, and as always, I'm sure will allow us to have a smooth and glitch-free seminar. For our listeners, whoever has comments or questions, you will see the icon at the bottom of your screen, which you will just have to click on to submit your questions. Remember, the topic today is Cannabis as a Treatment for Autism Spectrum Disorder. It is now my honor and pleasure to introduce one of Israel's top researchers in the field of autism, Professor Ilan Dinstein. Ilan is an associate professor in both the psychology as well as the cognitive and brain sciences departments at Ben-Gurion U. He received his doctorate from New York University and then did his postdoc at the world-famous Weizmann Institute of Science in Rehovot, as well as at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, very close to where our president, Professor Daniel Shamovitz, was born. He has been awarded with a plethora of world-renowned awards and has published over 45 papers in very high-impact journals. As director of the National Autism Research Center of Israel, he is leading an outstanding team of researchers, one of whom is Gal Meiri, to many out-of-the-box discoveries. He is also the consummate nice guy in mensch. Ilan, the screen is all yours.
Thank you so much, Mark, and it's a real pleasure to share some knowledge with you here this evening or this afternoon in Canada. So first, a warm hello from Israel. Everyone is fine on this end, and we've created a presentation for our talk today, and we'll indeed focus on cannabis treatments. But of course, I'd like to start by telling you a bit about the National Autism Center and some of the research and understanding how cannabis works, as well as many other treatments, are based on this wonderful infrastructure that we've had the privilege to create at Ben-Gurion University. We're very proud of this center. We're collaborating with many different medical centers and other universities in Israel to promote autism research, and it's an amazing topic. So my plan is to introduce the center to you, and then we'll move on to talk a bit about cannabis. So I'd like to start with this slide, which shows you how many people are actually involved in this project. You know, Gal Meiri and I have the pleasure of telling you about this research, but there are really dozens of individuals behind this really important research avenue, okay? And I'd like to emphasize the fact that this is very multidisciplinary. So here on the left in this group picture, you see a lot of the staff that work at the Autism Center. And this is where it's kind of the core leadership of the center. So next to me here, I'm a neuroscientist by training. Next to me is Idan Menashe, who's a geneticist and epidemiologist. And this is Gal Meiri, who you'll get to meet in a few minutes, who is a child psychiatrist. And next to us is Chava Golan, who is a molecular biologist. And together with us, there are many partners from many different fields in medicine, including pediatric neurology and gynecology and radiology and other fields, as well as many fields in science, ranging from clinical psychology and all the way to computer science and biomedical engineering. All of these faculty members and physicians are working on autism from very different angles, right? And each one of them has their own expertise. And the really important issue or the reason for an existence of a center is to get all of us to work together. And why is it so important that all of us from all these different fields work together? The answer is because autism is an extremely heterogeneous disorder. And the heterogeneity is apparent in many of the symptoms that appear in individuals with autism. And what I've laid out for you here, this is actually a partial list, but it gives you the flavor for this issue. In the center, in the big circle, you see the two core symptoms of autism. This is how autism is diagnosed by physicians like Gal Meiri. And where they search for one core symptom, which is difficulties with social communication. So if we break that down into examples, that means that children with autism have problems, for example, to create and hold eye contact. They have difficulties initiating play and communicating with other kids their age. They're typically isolated and more on their own and less in social interactions. So that's one core symptom. And the other core symptom is restricted and repetitive behaviors, which means that they often like to play with a single toy or have some stereotypical movements like hand flapping, or they might want to talk to you about just one topic that they love and will not want to discuss anything else. So these are the two core symptoms. They also they're very heterogeneous in and of themselves. So children are very different from each other in the way they express these symptoms. But kids with autism are also different from each other in a wide variety of what are called secondary symptoms. And this includes things like language abilities. Some children, actually, some individuals with autism never speak. They remain nonverbal for the majority of their life. Other children develop language normally and are even fluent in several languages. Some kids with autism have very high anxiety, others do not. Some have ADHD symptoms, others do not. So there's a wide variety of symptoms. And what this means, the reason I'm going through this long list, is to make it evident to you that there are different types of autism. And it's today very clear, both to the research community, I think, and to the medical community, that there are subtypes of autism, and that our big challenge today is in understanding how to identify these subgroups and treat each one of them in a way that's most beneficial. And so when we, at the National Autism Center, when we get together with all these different scientists and work together on understanding these symptoms, our focus is mainly on trying we try to focus on research that will improve ways of doing autism diagnosis and treatment. And when we think about that, those two core questions that we deal with at the center, they involve a wide variety, they require a wide variety of expertise because some of the useful information might actually come from genetics, right? If we think about early diagnosis, then we want to think about how genetics might be causing some types of autism. There might be other markers of autism that are evident in molecular biology, in samples that involve, for example, blood tests or things like that. There might be really important information that we can gather with technology, right? So Israel is startup nation. We want to get all of the different forms of technology working for us in discovering new ways of diagnosing autism early. For example, if you'll ask me about that later, I can show you some examples of eye tracking and other forms of computer vision and behavioral tracking that we use in order to not only try and identify children with autism, but also to actually quantify how severe specific symptoms are. And then, of course, when we get into developing pharmacology and new biological treatments, and right, that involves a lot of biology and other expertise are needed. And again, I want to repeat that the big question today in the field is determining what works for whom. Now, I want to spend a couple of minutes showing you a brief 3-minute video clip that I think does a good job of presenting the actual way that we do the research and the unique clinical research collaboration. One of our big strengths is that we've combined science into the clinics where autism is diagnosed and treated, and that has really worked amazingly well for us, enabled us to recruit many subjects and do some really important work. So let's go with the video.
In 2018, the Israeli Ministry of Science and Technology announced a grant to create a national autism research center. The grant was awarded to scientists from Ben-Gurion University and physicians from Soroka Medical Center, who had developed a unique model that integrated scientific research into the clinics where autism is diagnosed and treated. Every year, 1,800 new children are diagnosed with autism in Israel, in 40 medical centers. Approximately 180 of these diagnoses take place in Soroka Medical Center. The diagnosis of autism requires multiple visits, in which clinicians interview the parents and directly assess the behavior of the child. By integrating the research into the diagnosis visits and later follow-up visits, scientists at BGU are able to collect a wide variety of data from a large number of children. This data includes detailed information about the child and family from the Soroka Electronic Patient Record System, behavioral information from voice and video recordings of the child during interactions with the clinical staff, parental questionnaires about sensory sensitivities and sleep habits, saliva samples for genetic testing, blood samples for metabolic testing, eye tracking while watching TV, and even EEG recordings during sleep. As of May 2020, the national database contained information from over 1,000 children with autism and their family members. This research is unique and extremely rare on a global scale because it combines a wide variety of data from each of the children that is captured at the earliest stages of their development, when autism symptoms are first emerging. Today, scientists around the world agree that autism is not one disorder, but rather a family of distinct disorders that are likely to have different causes. By combining multiple types of data, the interdisciplinary team at the Negev Autism Center hopes to identify these distinct subgroups of children and match each subgroup with the most efficacious targeted treatments. The National Center is expanding these activities to additional medical centers throughout Israel. This expansion enables researchers across the country to identify the most effective diagnosis and treatment methods for autism, to develop new diagnosis technologies and medical interventions, and provide reliable and scientifically based advice to government officials. In parallel, the center is building a national research community that includes physicians, scientists, therapists, parents, and adults with autism. Hundreds of community members come to the annual Israeli meeting for autism research that is held at BGU. These efforts are transforming Israel into an international leader in clinical research that is focused on improving the quality of life for individuals with autism and their families.
Great. So I hope that gave you the gist of how we do the work. And of course, this infrastructure that was described in the movie is useful for performing a very wide number of experiments and studies on a wide variety of topics. And so today we're going to focus mostly on just one topic, on cannabis. Israel is actually a very strong player in the cannabis market, if you like. And it's also a very strong, there's actually relatively little research about cannabis. We'll get to that in a minute, but the research that does exist, much of it comes from Israel. So I wanted to start by giving you a little background about cannabis and its usefulness. And then actually we'll switch over to Dr. Gal Meiri, who will tell you about a really nice study that he and collaborators did in Be'er Sheva on this topic. So cannabis is actually a very ancient plant and has been used by humans for thousands of years. It's indigenous to Central Asia, very popular in India. It's a very fast growing, it's actually a weed, right? And it's good for many purposes. It's good for making oils and paper and rope and fabric, and you might know some products that are made of hemp, which are really nice. And in addition to that, there's the medicinal and recreational use, right? And the effects that cannabis has when you digest it or smoke it. And so cannabis is a very complicated plant. There are many different types of strains of cannabis. The most commonly known one is sativa. And it was used for thousands of years until it was outlawed in the Western world, starting in the 1850s. There's some interesting details about why it was outlawed that we won't get into. In Canada, it was outlawed in 1923 and is now actually being reintegrated into the Western world, and many of the more liberal countries, including Canada, are making it legal again. So cannabis includes a very large number of active ingredients, which are called cannabinoids, and they're located in the flowers of the plant. And that's where all of the medicinal and recreational properties come from. And these hundreds of cannabinoids, actually, nobody knows what the vast majority of them do, except for a couple of more better studied cannabinoids. And the first one, which is of course the most popular, is tetrahydrocannabinol, THC. And it is the component in cannabis that makes us feel high. It's the psychoactive component. It also increases appetite and does, which is actually useful for some medical conditions, particularly for people with nausea or cancer patients or situations like that where there's weight loss. And so in the modern strains of cannabis that have been developed for recreational use, the amounts of THC are getting larger and larger. It's in general a relatively safe drug, right? Many people would say that it has a safety profile that's similar maybe to alcohol, but using too much cannabis and using it regularly at high dosages is definitely associated with psychotic attacks and cognitive decline and developing dependency. And all of that is because of apparently because of the THC. The other big ingredient is called cannabidiol, CBD, and that's the second component that's been studied in recent years, and it actually has an opposite effect to the THC. It's a soothing drug, it's an anti-anxiety, and it has anti-epileptic qualities, and it counteracts the THC. So when we think about strains of cannabis, one of the things that's emphasized in recent years is the ratio between THC and CBD. So people who use cannabis for recreational purposes will usually select a strain that has a lot of THC and little CBD. But in other situations, like the treatment of autism and other disorders or other situations, you might actually want to do the opposite and use a CBD-rich strain or even isolate the CBD. So the bottom line is that there's very little research has been done to this point about the cannabinoids, the impact of most of those 400 cannabinoids. Nobody knows really what they do and what they impact. It's unclear whether there is
Ilan, another 2 or 3 minutes.
Sure. Whether there is an entourage effect. Do we need the actual plant to get the effect? Do we need a combination of many hundreds of cannabinoids? Or can we isolate just 1 or 2 of them and get useful treatments for specific medical conditions? And that's really where the science is today. So one successful example is that purified CBD has recently, in the last, I think it was 5 years ago or so, was approved by the FDA for treatment of epilepsy, and particularly for Dravet syndrome, which is a very severe form of epilepsy in children. And apparently the CBD helps in many cases to reduce the seizures. And I just included this picture of a wonderful Professor Rafi Meshulam from the Hebrew University, who is really a champion of this research. And the little that we know about cannabis today, much of this work comes from his lab and his efforts to elucidate the qualities of this plant. So now that I've told you a little bit about cannabis and about CBD and THC, I'd like to hand over the stage to Dr. Gal Meiri, who will tell you more about a specific study that he and others did at Soroka.
Ilan, as always, fascinating, brilliant, and I have to say, especially for me, who, when I was studying for my Master's of Clinical Social Work in 1973, when we would speak about a joint, we had to do it very quietly and very carefully. It is amazing, and you guys are at the forefront, I must say. And now for another mensch, Gal Meiri. Dr. Gal Meiri is a child psychiatrist and is the head of the preschool psychiatric unit at the Soroka University Center. And just today, it was announced that he's also been made head of child and adolescent department of psychiatry at Soroka Hospital. So, kol hakavod and mazal tov, Gal. He is also the clinical director of the National Autism Research Center of Israel, BGU, and is an assistant professor at BGU's Faculty of Health Sciences. He earned his MD and MHA degrees from Ben-Gurion University and did part of his specialty residency and further training at the Oregon Health Sciences University in Portland. He recently served as a president of the Israeli Association of Infant Mental Health. Gal, the computer and screen is all yours. Gal.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ilan, and thank you very much, Mark, for your kind words. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Erev Tov from here, and good afternoon to you in Canada and all other places worldwide. I would like to present observational studies that we did about medical cannabis for the treatment of autism. As a clinician that diagnose and treat children with autism for more than 25 years now, my passion is really to find treatments that will be safe and effective for the children. I know how easy it is to have a child with autism, and for some of them, you might need also to give medications. I know how psychiatric medications can help, and I also know the side effects and the limitation of those medications. So we are always seeking for new treatment, new methods. Of course, medications we prefer usually not to give, but when we need to give one to help for quality of life or for other reasons, we would like to see that it will be safe and it will be also effective. So when we are talking here about this real life experience with medical cannabis, next slide, please. As I said, few pharmacological treatments. It's really amazing when, as a child psychiatrist, you have so little to choose from. And then, as Ilan was mentioned before, actually medical cannabis, it's interesting how it grew like a movement from the patients and from the parents. It didn't come from the field of the industry. It didn't start like regular medication as it infiltrated into the community by a regular commercial way of the pharmaceutical industry. It started from people seeking for that kind of help, sometimes starting to give it in an illegal way, and then actually convincing the government at some point this is safe and we should start to use it and to explore it in research. So in 2007, the Israeli Ministry of Health started to give it to palliation in actually the only psychiatric now formally that exists. This actually just sent recently, but until about a month ago, it was only for PTSD for adults. So you start about 7 years ago to give it also to epilepsy after they were able to show in some studies a safety and efficacy profile. And as some of you might know, some of the children with epilepsy also have a comorbidity of autism. And those parents that gave the medical cannabis for the children with epilepsy that also had autism saw some improvement of other behaviors with children with autism. Not only they had less seizures, they also had improvement in their challenging behavior. Next slide, please. So here I'm just giving you some background about what we know, and it's not a lot. This is one of the reviews from one of the best papers in my field of child psychiatry. So from this meta-analysis, you can see that the only proven really things that you can say about medical cannabis is that the THC is beneficial for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, like for adults. And as I mentioned before, that the CBD is beneficial for treating epilepsy. We still don't have enough studies and enough evidence to support the efficacy to other symptoms like spasticity, neuropathic pain, and PTSD, according to that in children, and Tourette syndrome in children. People were trying to give it for those indications, but we still don't have enough research to prove that it's really safe and effective for those kind of diagnoses. So the conclusion of this meta-analysis is that we need to do more studies to evaluate the efficacy and safety in children. Next, please. It's really we are proud that in Israel we are leading research about cannabis. It's really interesting that this substance exists thousands of years, and everybody is talking about how we should try to explore it and do studies, but there are so little studies about it. So the first few studies, as you can see here, especially with the one that is from Tel HaShomer, with leading child neurologist in Israel, showing that for resistant epilepsy, they really took children that didn't respond to any anti-epileptic drugs because at the beginning they started to give it like a compassion treatment, because they say we don't know really if it's safe and if what's the efficacy. So we call it like a compassion treatment, but we will try it. And then they see really a very good response. Like it's really in every new medication, when you see 89% reduction in seizure frequency, it's like unbelievable. So it was really surprising. And again, for those children that had behavioral problems or had autism, they also saw some improvement with the other behaviors. Next, please. Other people were trying to do some studies and do some to explore the literature. I would mention here our friend Adi Aran from Sha'arei Tzedek, which is actually now the leading clinician and researcher in cannabis research for autism in Israel and maybe worldwide. So he started by publishing an observational study, and now just a month ago, he published his first double-blind proof of concept randomized trial, and he was able to see to show with more than 200 patients an improvement in challenging behaviors. He wasn't able to show improvement or a significant improvement in core symptoms of autism, but he did show improvement in specific behavior and safety. Next, please. So our study was actually, as I said, an observational study, meaning we went to to a specific company, Tikkun Olam, which is one of the leading companies in Israel for medical cannabis, and we explored their data after they were actually given license. The way it goes in Israel, in order to give medical cannabis to an adult or a child, you have to get a license from the Ministry of Health. It's called YACAR, Yechida LeCannabis Refui, Unit for Medical Cannabis in the Ministry of Health. So as a child psychiatrist or child neurologist, you are actually asking for a rishayon, for an approval to give them the medical cannabis. And then it goes through all the process of their system. And after the child is getting the license, he is giving the permission to buy it from one of the companies. And there are with really strict control about the production of the medical cannabis. So in this specific sample, we took all the children that were treated back then, started, and you see the numbers, and we actually, what we did was, a nurse was going through questionnaires at the beginning, and then they were giving the medical cannabis for about 6 months, and after 6 months, she phoned them again and asked to fill out a few questionnaires and asked about symptoms and about improvement, and I'll show more of that soon. Next, please. So as you can see here from the numbers, you can see that at those years, there were about 35,000 patients approved for medical cannabis, and almost half of them, about 15,000, received them from Tikkun Olam. So Tikkun Olam is actually one of the biggest suppliers in Israel, and we went to their records and we actually took all the children that were diagnosed with autism back then, and you can see here some of the data. It's the mean age was 12.9, and you see the gender. You have four times male, like we know in autism, and you see the other data. And you also see that you have about 14% of them with epilepsy. And you also see that there are some other comorbidities. Next, please. So before the treatment, parents were interviewed by a nurse, and they completed all these medical questionnaires. We wanted to know demographic, comorbidities, habits, concomitant medications. I have to say, we don't have enough research, but they were not asked to stop the other psychiatric medications. And from the knowledge that we know at this point, there is no problem or contraindication to take medical cannabis with psychiatric medication. So I know from my own clinical experience, sometimes I try to stop the psychiatric medications, but sometimes if it's problematic or if the behavior is extremely challenging, then we do both. So we start them on the medical cannabis, and if we can, we gradually stop the psychiatric medication. Next, please. So, as Ilan mentioned before, what we are trying to give today are those strains that are enriched with CBD, usually in the ratio is 20:1, more CBD. When we try, our clinical experience or observation is when we give only pure CBD, we see less effect. So we agreed that, and this is need to be more explored in terms of doses and strains, but for now, the recommendation is to give a CBD enriched strain with the ratio of 20:1. And since it's a real life, meaning we didn't titrate the dose per, like in a controlled study like we do with medications. We just wanted to see how they will adjust to the medical cannabis and what will they be given in the real life. So as you can see, the individual titration, starting dose of, you can see the numbers, and those was increased gradually with a wide range of doses. We don't know yet how or predict in advance who will respond to which dose. So they started 1 drop 3 times a day, and they could add up with 20 drops 3 times a day. So one of our future goals is really to try to understand who will respond to which dose. And after 6 months, all the patient underwent an additional assessment. Next, please. So this was very interesting and encouraging. As I emphasized in yellow only some of the results, which were very encouraging. As you see, after 6 months, you see a very impressive improvement, less restlessness, less rage attacks, less agitation, improvement with sleep, even for some improvement with speech, which was very encouraging. I have to say this finding we did not repeat in a DRN study, which was double blind, and also some relief in anxiety. And those children that had also epilepsy, they had improvement and reduction in their seizures frequency. Next, please. Other things that we wanted to see, since this was a real life, and I was not the physician of those patients. There were many physicians all over Israel. So we wanted to see what happened actually with the other medications that those patients were taking at the time they were given the medical cannabis. As you can see, the antipsychotics are the most common one, like risperidone and antiepileptic. So most of the physicians actually chose to continue the regular treatment, the neurological or the antipsychotic medications with the medical cannabis. Next, please. The most encouraging finding, I have to say, is coming from this slide, and this is the quality of life. This is, of course, subjective, but we ask the parents, what happened to you after 6 months and what happened to your child? And most of the parents, as you can see here, were moving from neither good or bad, and some were bad or very bad. You can see the nice shift to the right of the graphs. And after 6 months, you see more and more good or very good improvement in quality of life. Next, please. And as we asked, of course, about tolerability and safety, it seemed like it was really well tolerated, safe, and effective in reducing seizures, restlessness, and rage attacks. Compliance was high, less than 15% stopping the treatment after 6 months, and more than 80% of the parents reported significantly to moderate improvement in child global assessment. Next, please. So this is really encouraging, but we know that this observational study is limited. We still don't know the mechanism. We are not sure how this really works for those children because we are not sure where exactly the exact circuits in the brain of autism.
Gal, another 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. And we also be cautious about the interpretation of this study because, as I mentioned, it's an observational. Children of parents seeking cannabis therapy may not represent the general ASD population, like a self-selection bias. And this is another limitation which we are trying to solve in our next studies, is that this is an subjective self-report of the parents. We ask the parents what happened, about symptoms, about improvement, about quality of life. And what we are trying to do now in our center is, of course, to ask that, but also to have some objective measurements of the improvement. If we'll have some time, we can show you. So we do need, and we are planning now, a double-blind placebo-controlled trials for understanding of the cannabis effect on individuals with ASD. And I would just like to end with this last slide of really telling thank you for all the families and the children and to all my partners in this specific study.
Fantastic. Galit, are you coming on? Galit should be taking over.
Okay,
There you go.
here we go. Excellent. Thank you, Mark. And Dr. Meiri, Professor Dienstein, thank you both for a fantastic presentation. Really eye-opening in so many ways to listen to some of the research that's coming out. We've got a few questions that are lined up already. And for those in the audience who do wish to add their questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. I'd like to begin with a very high-level question and maybe a very hopeful question as well in many ways. Is cannabis the new miracle drug? And I'll address this question to both of you. Professor Dienstein, maybe we can start with you.
So it seems like many people believe that, right? So there's an explosion in terms of demand from many different people with different disorders and for different medical problems. And the big problem is that the research just isn't there to validate many of the anecdotal reports that cannabis might help in a variety of medical fields. But I actually think that Gal is more equipped to answer that question than me.
And I think in some ways you have, Dr. Meiri, but let me pose the question to you as well. Is medicinal cannabis the new miracle drug?
I would add to what Ilan said my own clinical experience with medical cannabis, because I did prescribe it to some of my most difficult patients. Unfortunately, at this point, we don't have enough research. I would say that I did see some really very encouraging improvements in terms of challenging behaviors, as in this study, of aggressiveness, self-injury. And for some of the families, this is a miracle, because if the child was very agitated, very aggressive, this is a very important, significant, sometimes for some of them life changer. We are not sure yet if it's really improving the core symptoms of autism, and we are not sure what can we do more with examining all the strains, the different strains, and that we might get more specific influence on specific brain regions that will give us more effect. So there is a lot of hope in this field for more improvement to explore.
And maybe hope is the operative word when it comes to this question. I'm going to start taking questions from the audience now. This one comes to us from Judith Stoller, and her question is, what is the goal of giving my child who is autistic cannabis? Will it sharpen his senses? Will he be more responsive? Will he exude more overt social behaviors, etc.? And perhaps Dr. Meiri, we can begin with you there.
At this point, when we give it mainly for those really difficult and challenging behaviors, we are not sure if it will help with those kind of senses or symptoms. Actually, I didn't mention it right now because of the shortness of time. In Israel, it's actually now an official indication in the Ministry of Health for only those children with really difficult behaviors after they tried 2 FDA drugs that are approved for those indications, meaning these days risperidone and aripiprazole. And we are not, I as a clinician do not expect for the treatment to be given to any child with autism to improve his attention or to improve other symptoms or behaviors. So hopefully when we have enough data and enough research, we can explore if it can also help to other core symptoms of autism.
This question comes to us from Jacqueline Tabak. The question is, are you doing any research in sleep disorders using cannabis? Dr. Dinstein, did you want to take that one?
So we're very interested. We do a lot of sleep studies, which we haven't had the chance to discuss today. We measure sleep in a variety. Gal mentioned the need for objective measures. So one of the really nice things about sleep is that you can measure it objectively using one of these, a Fitbit watch. And so we've been placing Fitbit sensors. We've been taping them to the arm of children with autism and studying their sleep. Sleep is a very prevalent problem in about half of the children. It would make sense that cannabis should help, particularly CBD, because it's supposed to have those anti-anxiety, relaxing, soothing properties. But we're still not there. We haven't, the study that Gal mentioned, the double-blind study, that we're planning to do with cannabis will also involve placing these Fitbit sensors, and then we'll have some more serious answers for that question.
Dr. Meiri, did you want to add anything to that?
in the real life, some physicians will try to give at nighttime a strain that is more enriched with THC, and they find it helpful for sleep. But this is not a general recommendation, and we are very careful about strains that are enriched with THC for children with autism, because we are not sure yet what will be the influence.
Anita Rosenfeld asks, have you had any observations of the impact of CBD usage on children related to COVID-19? And obviously, COVID-19 on our minds. If it's not necessarily CBD, but perhaps other related research at this point that is related to COVID-19. Professor Dienstein, if we can get you to start off.
Yeah, so it's difficult to ignore COVID-19, right? So research has actually been hit pretty hard by the COVID story. It actually stopped a lot of our science. But we were, of course, very curious to try and learn about COVID-19 impact on families with autism. We don't have anything cannabis related with that respect, but I will tell you that we did a relatively large Israeli scale study where we had about over 300 families of children with autism fill out some questionnaires about the COVID-19 impact, and particularly, so this was at the beginning of the affair when in Israel everything was closed down very strictly for a period of about a month and a half. And this also included special education. So even children with autism remained at home for a period of at least 6 weeks, which was unheard of, right? Special education always remains open. It has remained open ever since. And surprisingly, we were amazed that some of the responses were actually positive, and that when we asked families what this did, they of course, they had a lot of difficulties. They had a lot of tantrums and some aggressive responses as well. But a lot of families reported that it did wonders to the social interactions in the family and the family relationships and bonding, and apparently parents got to know their children, and that there were some improvements in social communication and things like that. Now, our intuition is that this was because we asked them about the first closure at the beginning of the period. And our intuition is that if we ask them again today, the responses might unfortunately not be as positive, because this has turned into a chronic situation, right? Which involves hardships for very extended periods of time, and that has a negative impact. So that's what we know right now.
Okay. Dr. Meiri, a question from Miriam Tartar. Have any studies been done on cannabis benefits for Parkinson's disease?
I know there are some that are trying to explore it. Some encouraging results for Parkinson and for tremor generally, but it didn't get to the point of really being like an FDA approved drug, or there are only few studies. They seem promising, but there are only few of them.
And just along the same line of questioning from Paula Blitzstein, what does your latest research indicate about the relationship between ASD and PANDA or PANS? Anything in that area?
We know that this has to do with general psychiatry problems and with OCD, but we didn't see a connection between that and specifically to ASD. But this is really something that we are trying to do with the big data that we have from the hospital, to see if we are trying to find those relationships between organic or medical problems and ASD. But we didn't find something specific about that.
Okay. Professor Dinstein, in your presentation, you had mentioned that here in Canada, cannabis, of course, was illegal for a period of time, up until the last couple of years, really, and it's been legalized, not only for medicinal purposes, but for recreational purposes. We are talking about medicine at this point, but of course, there's also a philosophical way that people tend to look at the use of a substance that used to be used as a drug and has now turned into something that's showing potentially medicinal uses as well. What has the public reaction been like in Israel to using medicinal cannabis, specifically on children?
Mm-hmm. I think in general, the Israelis are pretty open-minded. So we tend to adapt quickly to new ideas, I think, in Israel. And as Gal mentioned, the pressure to use cannabis came from the families. It started with these anecdotal reports that cannabis actually works. And many of those reports were from parents who gave it to their children, to their young children, mostly with epilepsy, but also later in other families. And you know, so it's again this strange situation where the science follows the community instead of being the other way around, where the science guides the community. But you know, that only makes our job that much more important, and we need to quickly come up with the relevant answers so that we can answer all of these questions in a more formidable way.
Okay, I'll pose this next one to both of you. It's from Barbara Steinberg, and somewhat along the same lines of the question that I just asked. From past experience, can cannabis negatively affect the growing brain? Dr. Meiri, maybe we can begin with you.
Yes, that's this is actually related also to the previous question. This is that's the part that we are worried about, and that's why we take so many cautious way to give it, and we think we need a more also long-term studies. There are some studies saying that for recreational cannabis using at childhood in a enriched THC, it could hurt the developing brain. There are some animal models. Again, it's a recreational and it's enriched with THC. I would say also that despite the fact that Israel is pretty open about it, there are some mixed responses about it, and there is also an emotional sometimes debate about it. From the professional point of view, I would say that child psychiatrists are more reluctant. Because we see for example, in adolescents on psychiatric wards, sometimes you can see children and adolescents with an extensive use of recreational cannabis, and they went to psychosis. So we are worried that if we will not really control it and we'll give only the strains that we know that are safe, that are enriched with CBD, then we might go to cause a damage to either the developing brain or to cause a psychotic break or something like that. So we need really to be careful about that.
Okay, and Professor Dinstein, do you want to add anything to that?
No, it just again emphasizes this need to do these studies properly, right? And that's exactly the goal and the motivation for creating this National Research Center, and right, and that's our job for the next few years.
Right. And you have a second annual conference that is coming up as well. Can you tell us about some of the highlights that can expect to come out of it?
Yes, so this unfortunately is going to be a smaller conference. Actually, last year we had a conference with about 700 attendees, and we brought in the entire community and parents and families and therapists. This year it's going to be a bit more limited. We'll have a couple of days, mostly for the scientists. We're bringing in some heavy speakers from from outside the country. Simon Baron-Cohen is a famous professor from the UK who does amazing autism research, and Professor Ami Klin from Atlanta, from the Marcus Autism Center. And so together with them, we'll also celebrate some Israeli autism research and share some ideas.
It really is amazing what you're doing there. Dr. Meiri, a question here. I'm not quite sure who it's coming from, but a fair question. Is Asperger's still a form of autism? And if so, do you have any information on treating Asperger's with CBD?
So according to the DSM-5, which is a psychiatric book that comes from America, starting from 2013, like 8 years ago, when they gave the new criteria for autism, actually Asperger was excluded, not excluded, dropped, or they did a new diagnosis, ASD, Autistic Spectrum Disorder. So children or adults that were previously diagnosed with Asperger could be either given today, in today terms, the diagnosis of ASD, high cognitive, or mild ASD. Some of them might get another diagnosis of SCD, social communication disorder, which is another new diagnosis at the DSM-5. But we do not have any specific knowledge about how CBD might influence children with high functioning autism, or previously called Asperger. And as I mentioned before, today in Israel and in other places, the main symptoms or target symptoms for the treatment of CBD are seizures and aggressiveness, agitation, and self-injury behaviors.
Okay, we have a question coming to us from viewers from Boston, and they say that in their case, their doctor won't even engage in a conversation about the use of CBD. Is there any research and data that they can point to? And they point out that if they were in Israel, obviously they would be seeking this kind of treatment. Dr. Meiri, did you want to take that one, or Professor?
Yeah, I'm sure it's a process. You know, it's really amazing because I get emails and phone calls from friends from North America with the same issue. In some states in America, they are more open for it. Physicians also in Israel, some are afraid or wouldn't like to even start thinking about it. And I think also you can use the data and the studies that are now exist and use them as a reference for this, at least for the safety profile of medical cannabis, CBD enriched. So that's what I would give to a physician that is reluctant to give it. And also in Israel, there are some physicians that would like to explore it, and some would be reluctant to give it. But it's getting, since we get more and more positive reports about it, it's getting more asked by patients and by the parents. I also get people that are disappointed from it, that even I prescribed it, and after they tried a month or two or even more, they said it didn't do anything. So I do get also this kind of responses. I would like to see it as a physician as another safe medication that I have as an option to give to my patients to alleviate some of their symptoms.
Okay, Dr. Meiri, thank you. I'd like to wrap up with a question to both of you, and maybe we can begin with Professor Dienstein. Looking ahead to the next 12 months, what's coming down the pipeline that you'd like to share with us?
There's a lot. So I think, well, the one of the things that I'm most excited about, except for the sleep research that I mentioned before, which as a young parent, I always know sleep is such an important component of life. But except for the sleep research, we're doing a lot with technology. So as I mentioned, Israel is the startup nation. We want to take advantage of that. BGU University has an amazing engineering, a variety of engineering departments. We collaborate with many of them in developing new technologies to identify and quantify autism symptoms. And one of the reasons that this is so important is, again, those objective measures that Gal mentioned before. We want to have objective computer vision tools and things like that that will enable us to determine whether a child is improving or not after they try a certain medication. And so that, I think, is one of the most exciting aspects of our research.
Okay, and Dr. Mary, in the next year, what does it look like for you?
Pretty much the same. I'm excited about this really wonderful collaborations that we have as physicians with brilliant researchers like Professor Dimchen. This is a win-win that goes for more than 5 years now and just getting better and bigger. I have to say, one of the advantages, and we are very proud of it, that this is we are working in a public service in the medical system, and the parents that join the research are actually joining a community, and they don't have to come for a private study for a specific researcher. They just come to their regular visits, and when they come to the regular visits, they are recruited to some cutting edge research that they do in the same time that they're doing their clinical visits. So this gives us a lot of good, excellent collaboration with the community and with the parents. And this is just getting better over time. And that's what I hope for the next year.
Fantastic. And we're going to have to leave it there. I know that there's some questions in the Q&A box still, so clearly a very engaging topic. Thank you both for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Galit.
Thank you.
Guys, I have to tell you that I'm looking at the Q&A box and we have 23 questions there. And I know we're not paying you for overtime, but I hope you won't mind when we will email you the questions for answers, and then we will try and email them back to those who have asked them, because you guys were just outstanding. What can I say? Thanks so much for taking time out of your very busy schedules, and I know personally how busy they are, and for joining us today. And I keep telling everyone, see our webinars and you'll see world-class renowned researchers, and I think there are more of them at BGU. At least I say that. Whether it's true or not, it doesn't matter, but I believe it is. There are more at BGU than any other university in Israel. So we have chosen wisely to have had you. And how amazing that BGU is also truly in the forefront in Israel and probably in the world in the field of autism research. And I know that there are going to be some more exciting information coming out from you guys in the not too distant future. So I'm just telling everyone, stay tuned. Huge thank yous to our listening audience for supporting us and the outstanding Ben-Gurion University. And of course, like all universities, we rely on our friends to support the research being conducted there. And we have lots of buildings to be named, lots of programs to be named. Just call me. I'm the expert at 7-8 figure donations, as is each of our executive directors. And if it's only 180, we will also accept that, because we value all of our supporters. And check us out at www.bengurion.ca. I would really like to thank my staff across Canada, my national lay leadership, as well as my excellent colleagues in Israel, President Daniel Shamovitz, Vice President Jeff Kay and his team, and Doug Sesserman, CEO of the American Associates and his team. Oh, I just remembered the last question that Galit had asked about Asperger was actually sent in by Naomi Olbaum, the wife of our national president. Stay tuned for our next webinar on International Women's Day on March 8th, called Choose to Challenge, Empowering Women at BGU, Israel and the Negev. In keeping with the theme, I will not be moderating that one, as it will be in the extremely capable hands of an all-woman crew, as it should be. Check out the registration for all our other upcoming events on our website, again, www.bengurion.ca, where you'll also see planned programs and webinars. And at this point, I would like to give a shout out to our staff team in Canada for their outstanding efforts in organizing all the aforementioned upcoming events and for making these webinars run so smoothly. On March 18th, I'm very proud to announce that in conjunction with our French-speaking colleagues in Belgium, Switzerland, and France, we will be holding a webinar on entrepreneurship at BGU, all in French, and this has been spearheaded and led by our own Executive Director of Montreal, Simon Ben-Simon. So until we meet again on the screen, I wish you a COVID-safe 3 weeks, which is when I'll be back. Wear masks, and I mean back in the webinar seat, and keep social distancing. May I also take this opportunity to wish everyone a Chag Kasher V'Sameach for Pesach, which is really just around the corner, and hot off the press for Canadians and etc. People in Montreal over 70 can now register for vaccinations. I mean, how we lag behind Israel, it is just amazing in so many areas, also in vaccines, and caregivers over 60 can also register. My appointment is this Friday at 6:10 p.m. Yoo-hoo! Keep safe, wear masks, and thank you all so much. And Gal and Ilan, again, fabulous. Galit, tremendous job, and everyone else. Over and out from Côte St. Luc.
Bye.